Well, isn't this nice? A change from the usual belligerent types.
Hello lovelies. Tabletop List is probably shifting to Saturdays, and I think we might be taking another day off today due to illness amongst the group and recovery. So I thought maybe, given Tuesday is sort of free again for video making, I might make Tuesday Politics Day and make it just one day a week so I don't get obsessive and do too much of it. And I'll clearly label it as such so that people can avoid the day and the videos if they want. Plus, I'll reiterate, I do divide all of my content between different playlists, so if you want to avoid political and social commentary here, it's really quite easy for the most part for you to do so. Anyway, I apologise, but it is necessary that I first play you a short 2-minute speech that Trump gave relating to transgender issues.
Here's my plan to stop the chemical, physical, and emotional mutilation of our youth. On day one, I will revoke Joe Biden's cruel policies on so-called gender-affirming care. Ridiculous. A process that includes giving kids puberty blockers, mutating their physical appearance, and ultimately performing surgery on minor children. Can you believe this? I will sign a new executive order instructing every federal agency to cease all programs that promote the concept of sex and gender transition at any age. I will then ask Congress to permanently stop federal taxpayer dollars from being used to promote or pay for these procedures and pass a law prohibiting child sexual mutilation in all 50 states. It'll go very quickly. I will declare that any hospital or healthcare provider that participates in the chemical or physical mutilation of minor youth will no longer meet federal health and safety standards for Medicaid and Medicare and will be terminated from the program immediately. Furthermore, I will support the creation of a private right of action for victims to sue doctors who have unforgivably performed these procedures on minor children. The Department of Justice will investigate Big Pharma and the big hospital networks to determine whether they have deliberately covered up horrific long-term side effects of sex transitions in order to get rich at the expense of vulnerable patients, in this case, very vulnerable. We will also investigate whether Big Pharma or others have illegally marketed hormones and puberty blockers which are in no way licensed or approved for this use. My Department of Education will inform states and school districts that if any teacher or school official suggests to a child that they could be trapped in the wrong body, they will be faced with severe consequences, including potential civil rights violations for sex discrimination.
Now, I don't know how aware you might be if you're not British, but aspects of this whole thing are very similar to a piece of UK legislation that was called Section 28. It's fairly notorious here. I slyly joined a couple of protests against it from my college back in the day, and it's probably a little bit of a lesson on just how this shit tends to run. Quick history and politics lesson then. Section 28 was part of the Local Government Act of 1988. That was still during Thatcher's reign of terror, if you're keeping score. This was a law with the ever-so-friendly wording to prohibit the promotion of homosexuality by local authorities. Of course, nobody was actually promoting homosexuality, just as nobody today is promoting transgenderism. Then, as now, it was about showing that such relationships and attractions were normal, and such feelings were normal, and combating fear through ignorance, and reassuring gay and bi kids, or kids from gay and bi families, that there was nothing wrong with them. Section 28 was a fear and disgust reaction by reactionary conservatives, just as we're seeing that towards trans people today. Shockingly similar in many regards. And Section 28 entrenched and extended the fear and hatred of LGBT people and increased the self-loathing and the bullying of kids for nearly 30 years. Not great. As a result of Section 28, it meant that if a school dared to suggest to a child that being gay was acceptable and normal, not normative, but normal, that was now potentially illegal. It was so open to abuse that teachers feared often to even step in and stop the bullying of LGBT students, in case the teacher ended up in legal trouble and being suspended or even barred from teaching for stepping in to defend the LGBT student. It also forced local councils, the people who deal with your rubbish bins and the potholes, to clamp down on non-traditional family discussions, resources and support. So how did all of this come about? Quite similar in many ways to the anti-trans hysteria that we see today. The AIDS epidemic was ongoing. That was part of it. There was also a children's book released in 1983 called Jenny Lives with Eric and Martin. And that book tried to normalize different family types than the normal heterosexual couple with 2.4 children of the time. That's all. I mean, horrific, right? What a shocker that a kid might grow up knowing that not everyone necessarily has a mum and dad in the traditional cookie-cutter suburb. No, Thatcher was having none of that. Her infamous comment about it said it all. Children who need to be taught to respect traditional moral values are being taught that they have an inalienable right to be gay. Yeah, nothing like denying people's very existence in the name of traditional values, or that who they are might be valid. We didn't get shot of that law completely until 2003. And it casts a very long, nasty and petty shadow over Britain's LGBT community, and it did absolutely nothing for the well-being of those kids affected, who, of course, still grew up to be LGBT, but in an atmosphere that for much of their childhood was a lot less understanding and accepting than it could have been, and a lot more hostile than it needed to be. Stats are pretty consistent over the years. About 1 in 20 people turn out to be LGBT, so about 1 to 2 people per school class that existed. That's people I knew were affected by this growing up. Maybe 20 to 40 kids in my whole age cohort and bracket for secondary school. And now in the US, Trump's not even in office yet, and he's rolling out things that are far worse for the trans community than the horribleness and pettiness that Section 28 unleashed. But there are still marked similarities. And again, it's all based on fear-mongering and bullshit. He's promising to directly target trans rights, healthcare, and access to gender-affirming care, or even, it's weasel-worded, but even acknowledgement that trans people exist in educational materials and medical materials. And the way they excused it under Section 28 was attacking things that promoted transgenderism, but just as with Section 28, their definition of promoting is always very broad. In application, it's used to attack media and other materials that just merely normalize and explain. That's all. He's making it his mission to restrict trans people's access to vital mental and physical healthcare services based on deranged Facebook lies about minors getting surgery and other similar myths. It's almost uncanny. Section 28 was based on fear, ignorance, and protect the children false narratives used to attack gay people, hyped up by AIDS paranoia. And now Trump's efforts also sound rather eerily familiar to those of us old enough and in the know enough. What we're seeing is a cycle, a tired, damaging cycle, where people in power and ignorant people and reactionary religious minorities, for the most part, let's not fuck around, they whip up fear against people. They create moral outrage about something that isn't actually happening and use their moral concerns to justify attacking and harming an entire community. Yeah, okay. Trans activists are super annoying, and overly right-on educational resources are super duper cringe. But do you really want to deny people what is often self-affirming and life-saving care? See, that's the thing. It often saves people's lives. I don't think you also want to deny their existence altogether. I dare say most people, even those who voted for Trump, even those uncomfortable around trans people, don't actually want to completely deny their existence or cause them harm, but your fear and unease has been exploited to actively attack these people now. Assuming, of course, that the orange cunt does what he said he's going to do. And that's no guarantee, but I think even wanting to and saying you want to is bad enough. Section 28 left scars that took decades to start healing. The new wave of restrictions in the US on trans issues isn't really new at all. It's a copy-paste from a dated playbook from the 80s and 90s, used by far-right regimes and groups around the world. And just like before, it's going to hurt real people. Far more than an incredibly rare botched surgery or changed mind is going to have. It's going to hurt kids, adults, whole families. And is that really what you wanted? I'm sure some of you will disappoint me by saying yes or doubling down on the Facebook nonsense that Trump seems to have fallen for. But I think better than that of most of you. I don't think you actively want to cause harm to these people. I think you just disapprove of some things, most of which, as it turns out, are actually bullshit. But it's too late now. And this is only just starting. But by this, and talk about elevating RFK, and RFK's blithering about vaccines already going on, spreading bullshit, I think this all shows how this new regime is not only going to neglect public health, but is actively going to harm it. Zang. A lapidary of wondrous stones and a bestiary of sundry creatures are two OSR resources by Neil Coates, providing you with the alchemical and magical supposed properties of stones, and a bestiary of all the strange creatures in their original interpretations in medieval lore. Available at lulu.com, drive-thru-RPG, and post-mort.com.
Not understand your social